Welcome back. So in this video, we're going to continue talking about complex numbers, and we're going to incorporate the next two operations. We're going to talk about multiplication and division. So the basis of it is remembering that I squared is going to be -1 because I is just square root of -1. So I squared is just -1. So that's an important thing to remember. So that means when you're multiplying two imaginary numbers, you end up with 21I squared because 3 times 7 and then I times I. Well, I squared is just -1, so you end up back with a real number when you multiply two imaginary numbers. So why am I starting with this? What does it mean for you? Well, what it means is that you never, ever leave I squared in your answers. Okay, I should never see I squared in an answer because you should know you can simplify it. You can turn it back into a real number then. So, in order to multiply complex numbers, you can use the same methods as when you multiply polynomials. You can end up distributing and you can end up foiling. So, let's take a look. Here is a distributing one. So 3i times -5 would be -15i. 3i times 2i, well 3 times 2 is 6. And then I times I is I squared. However, remember, you never want to leave an I squared. That I squared is the same thing as a -1. So really that is going to be a -6. So I'm going to write that first. -6 minus 15i. And then you just leave your answer like that. Real part first, imaginary part second. Foiling works the same way also as it does with polynomials. So first, outside, inside, and last. So my like terms combine, so 10i minus 12i is a -2i. And then this right here, don't forget that becomes a -1. So really, that is a positive 15 at the end there. So 8 plus 15, well, that's going to give me a 23 minus 2i. So again, nothing shocking. It's just doing the same things that we've been doing before, but now using imaginary complex numbers in them. So that's the multiplying that I need you to know. Well, what about dividing? We have some dividing to take care of too. So dividing complex numbers, you need to multiply top and bottom by the complex conjugate of the denominator. So I'm sorry, I forgot that's actually at the bottom of the page here. Complex conjugates. What a complex conjugate means is you flip the sign of the imaginary part. So if I have 1 plus 2i, its complex conjugate is 1 minus 2i. If I have 3 minus 4i, its complex conjugate would be 3 plus 4i. Conjugates just mean you flip the signs of the imaginary parts, all right? And so, that's what you use when you're dividing. You simplify your quotient expressions that way because it is the only way that you can simplify it. So here, what's the conjugate for this first one of 2 plus I? Well, the conjugate is going to be 2 minus I. So you're going to multiply the top and the bottom of the fraction by that. So we have 3i, 2 plus I. Now I'm going to multiply the top and bottom by that 2 minus I, all right? I'm actually going to add that up here just to save some space for myself. All right, so I can keep working down here. So on top, that is our distributive property, right? And it's going to multiply that 3i to both. So on top, I get 6i minus 3i squared. On the bottom, now the bottom, that is a foiling problem. We get 4 minus 2i plus 2i minus I squared. All right, so on the top, remember that is really -1 right there. So on top, we really have 6i plus 3. All right, because that negative will turn it positive. -2i plus 2i cancels out. Again, think of this as a -1. So 4 minus a -1, 4 plus 1 gives me 5. So in simplified form, that's what I end up getting. 3 plus 6i all over 5. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot I had a lot more space down there set aside for it. So for the next one, what's the complex conjugate? Well, the complex conjugate is where I flip that sign, all right? I use a plus instead of a minus. So I'm going to multiply it to the top and the bottom. So on top, that's going to be a distributive property. So that's going to give me 2 plus 8i. On the bottom, that is going to be a foiling property. So I get 1 plus 4i minus 4i minus 16i squared. The top doesn't simplify at all. It stays just like that. But on the bottom, we have 4i minus 4i. And then remember, that is -1. So we essentially get 1 plus 16 on the bottom, which would turn into 17. So a little bit of work going through this, but as long as you take those steps, you multiply by that conjugate, you substitute in the -1s, and as long as you're very careful with your signs, then you shouldn't have any trouble getting to the answers. All right, so now that we're done with our videos, actually this was the last video of the chapter, so congratulations on getting through it all. But now I need your summary. All right, so please take a moment, summarize how you're going to remember the steps to do this, because it does take a little bit to remember the conjugate and then multiply, substituting the -1. So maybe write what your little trick is going to be to remember that. And then once you're done with that, just be ready to come back and do your practice work in class.